We heard going into, especially the California primary. I want to look at New Jersey and California in particular, but the California primary is essentially a general election, a wide open, Wild West kind of race in that jungle primary. And it seems to me that one of the takeaways from Super Tuesday and going into the other primaries, then going into November, is that Donald Trump not only is a force, obviously he's going to be a force, but he's a positive force, it appears to me, on most Republican candidates.
Well, I think there's no question that his endorsement matters, and it did in California with John Cox. But I also think that he is motivating the Republican base in ways we have not seen in a long time. And I would say that that's because he's followed through on doing the things that he campaigned on doing. And he's done it with incredible resistance from the left, but he's succeeded and he's fought through. And I think most conventional Republican politicians wouldn't fight through the way that Donald Trump has. And I think that's inspiring Republican voters and activists. And I think getting them very energized going into the 2018 elections.
You agree with my assessment that if you buck the president, you do so at your own peril? We saw an example in Alabama where the incumbent that did not win is going to be a runoff in Alabama, paid the price there. On the other hand, you mentioned John Cox, the candidate for governor in California. There's a dichotomy there, obviously, but it seems as though there would be a price to pay. That's number one. And number two, John Cox probably got in there in the end by energizing the base, energizing the Republicans and some independents in California. He might not have gotten there without the endorsement from President Trump.
Well, you know, I think it really did at the end of the day was make sure that he was in the top two.
Right.
You know, he wasn't really just running against Travis Allen. He was running against Antonio Villaraigosa and John Chung and Delane Easton, like you say, this jungle primary situation. And I think what Republicans in California and Republicans nationally were very concerned about, given the overwhelming number of Democrats in the state, is that we were very likely to see a top two Democrat runoff with no Republican at the top of the ticket in November. And I think the Trump endorsement helped consolidate conservative voters and motivate them to turn out. And I think that's why he had such a commanding lead over Antonio Villaraigosa for the number 2 spot.
All right, I don't want to get too into the weeds and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but in general, what does a John Cox do now? Okay, he energized the base. They came out and they voted, but of course there are more Democrat voters and more independent voters that lean Democrat in the Golden State. Does he do a Nixon, where he fades to the right during the primary and then during the general election runs to the left?
You know, in this situation, I don't think that's the path that anyone wants to go on. I think the reality is, while there are way more Democrats than Republicans in the state, there's also way more overreach by the Democrats. The direction of this state, while people identify as Democrats, when you look at the top issues facing the state, people support the center-right policy prescriptions for those issues. One thing, you know, is the gas tax, the repeal of the gas tax, which will be on the ballot in November. That is overwhelmingly popular across parties, across demographics, and I think that's going to be a big driver. It's going to be quality of life issues like taxes, affordable housing, things that I think the left won't be able to get out of their own way on. And I think John Cox would be smart to stay in a centrist Republican position running on a conservative fiscal platform.
All right. I want to talk about the gas tax in just a minute, but first, George Soros. He was infusing himself into multiple local campaigns in California and multiple local campaigns across the United States. He's essentially pumping millions and millions of dollars into district attorney races. To me, and he failed, by the way, we should point out, largely in California. He targeted 3 major metropolitan areas and failed in all 3, including San Diego and I think Alameda, and there was one more. He's essentially trying to, as I put it, decriminalize the criminal justice system at the local level. How do you characterize it?
No, I think that is a way to look at it. He wants activist district attorneys that won't enforce laws that George Soros doesn't agree with. Not prosecuting certain crimes, not sentencing juveniles as adults, even in the case of capital murder. You know, there have been some of these candidates that said they won't enforce, quote, unquote, quality of life issues. He doesn't want to enforce the death penalty. He wants to end the bail system. He wants to close jails and prisons. And these things are all, I think, very utopian ideas of what society could be. But the reality is that San Diego has one of the lowest crime rates of any urban county in America. And I would say what San Diego, as an example, is doing right works. How do we make it safer by putting more criminals onto the streets at the expense of victims. So I think it's a very bad formula, and it's something that is starting to fail finally.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One America News on YouTube, and call your cable provider and kindly demand that One America News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.